Stop. Don't scroll past this. Put down whatever you are about to pick up in the next 10 seconds, because the most divisive woman on the planet is coming apart at the seams in front of a live global audience. And the one broadcaster who called this years ahead of the pack, the one broadcaster who walked away from one of the biggest chairs in British television for daring to say it on air, is now sitting back and watching the whole thing land exactly the way he mapped it out. Piers Morgan, whether he's your cup of tea or not, has been proven right on so many of the five-year-old positions he took about the Duchess of Sussex that even the critics who screamed loudest at him about this particular subject have gone strangely quiet in recent weeks. Tonight, we're going to walk you through 10 very specific positions Piers Morgan has held in his columns and on his broadcasts for 5 uninterrupted years. Positions that cost him a career on British breakfast television. Positions the mainstream press wrote off as extreme. Positions that are, one after another, being confirmed in the most public, most humiliating, most permanent way you can imagine. Stay with us all the way down to number 1, because that final one is the position that may, when the dust settles, come to define this entire post-royal chapter. Tonight we count backwards from 10 to 1. The contradiction Meghan has no answer for. The crown she can't seem to stop reaching for after publicly renouncing it. The Serena Williams unboxing that became a PR pileup in slow motion. The Ukraine intervention that arrived at the worst possible diplomatic moment. The very deliberate public silence about Harry on the biggest stage of the king's reign so far. The friendship template that keeps ending in exile. The visa dossier that may yet turn out to be the most consequential legal thread in this entire saga. The financial deadline one source has now put on a 5-year clock. The bullying probe that quietly refuses to go away. And the single position Piers Morgan took in 2021 that ended his career on British breakfast television, and that the rest of the world has, in painfully slow motion, finally come around to. So settle in, pour something strong, because this is the run of vindications, all landing inside the same extraordinary 7 days. Truth 10. The contradiction Meghan cannot explain away. We begin here because this is the moment the whole thing split open in broad daylight, and millions of viewers watched it happen live. Only a matter of weeks ago, Meghan sat down for a long, softly lit, carefully staged video conversation with her close friend Jamie Kern-Lima. 2 rocking chairs, minimal makeup, golden hour lighting, the entire aesthetic engineered to whisper, "This is the real her, this is the unedited woman, this is the truth." In that conversation, Meghan looked straight down the barrel of the camera and told viewers she was living the happiest, most fulfilled chapter she had ever known. Her exact wording. She spoke lovingly about her children. She spoke about a marriage that was thriving. She spoke about the beautiful life she had built for herself in California. She likened Harry to a hero from a video game, her protector, her champion, her everything. Hold on to every one of those words, because the timeline of what followed matters more than anything else in this segment. Then, only weeks later, in the final days of April, Meghan pushed something out to her 4.5 million followers that sent the entire online world into a spin. She shared a quote about closing the door on the hardest 7 years of your life. She reposted it twice inside a single day. Piers Morgan, according to his own published column, responded within hours. And the first thing he did was the most basic piece of arithmetic any journalist could do. Count backwards. 7 years from April 2025 drops you cleanly into 2018, her wedding year. The year she married Prince Harry. The year she stepped into the most famous family in the world. Coincidence. Piers has never entertained the idea of coincidence when it comes to Meghan Markle. Not once. He has argued, repeatedly and unwaveringly, that this is a woman who communicates in layers. Everything can be denied later. Everything has a target. Nothing is ever an accident. So here's the elementary question. How does a person move from the happiest life she has ever known into the hardest 7 years of her life in the space of 21 days? Which Meghan Markle is the audience supposed to believe? Because both of those statements cannot be true at the same time. They cannot even share a paragraph without one of them looking like theater. This is where Piers Morgan has always begun his case. Not with insults, not with personal attacks, with the most fundamental journalistic question in the entire trade. Do the facts hold together? And the answer, over and over again, is no. Truth 9. The Queen who never actually was. Here's a point Piers Morgan has been hammering for 5 years that somehow gets buried every single time the next controversy detonates. Meghan Markle is not a queen. She walked away from the royal family in January of 2020. She and Harry made that decision in public, in dramatic fashion, and with no route back. They exited the institution. They rejected the duties. They surrendered the formal positions. And yet, year after year after year, she has kept herself surrounded by people who continue to treat her as though the crown were still on her head. Astrologers in her sphere posting about her reigning again, capital R, capital Q, queen. Influencers in her circle amplifying monarchical imagery at every opportunity. The wider Sussex content machine quietly stitching a halo of royal language and royal aesthetics around a woman who has formally handed the royal role back. Piers Morgan has called it out on air. The moment Meghan referred to herself as a princess on a podcast, speaking with young girls, he described as one of the most revealing slips she has ever made. She is not a princess. She knows she is not a princess. But she reached for the word anyway because the brand demands it. The commercial engine depends on it. The customer base her lifestyle products are aimed at is most efficiently unlocked by leaning on the very imagery she supposedly renounced. And here is the central argument Piers has never once walked back, and that the wider royal commentary industry has gradually caught up to. You do not get to hold on to the crown and the victim narrative at the same time. You do not get to abandon an institution, publicly attack that institution, monetize your attacks on that institution, and then trade on its symbolism to sell jam and candles. You have to pick one. Meghan has spent 7 years refusing to pick one, and audiences on both sides of the Atlantic have grown extraordinarily weary of watching her attempt to occupy both positions simultaneously. The polling numbers back it up. The engagement metrics on her lifestyle content back it up. The deafening A-list silence surrounding her most recent wedding anniversary backs it up. The audience has clocked it, and the audience has, very politely, stopped pretending it hasn't. Truth 8. The Serena Williams disaster nobody in the operation saw coming. You have to grasp the full sweep of this one, because the surface story is embarrassing enough on its own, but what sits beneath it is genuinely fatal for the entire commercial project. Meghan launched the latest drop of her As Ever collection. According to the published product listings, that collection included a candle priced at $64, alongside gourmet chocolates retailing at $42 per package, presented in a pale blue box. A lifestyle brand pitching itself as aspirational luxury for the discerning modern woman. The team executed the playbook every lifestyle brand runs at launch. They sent a PR package to Meghan's most famous, most loyal, most reliably supportive celebrity friend on the planet, Serena Williams. Now, when your closest, highest-profile ally agrees to film an unboxing for millions of followers, that is meant to be the softest, organic launch moment you could possibly script. It is meant to be the instant the lifestyle empire announces its arrival to the world. What actually unfolded, on every frame of the footage that ended up online, was something else entirely. Serena opened the box. The chocolates, visible to any viewer on camera, had arrived crushed, cracked, fused together in clumps. She looked down at them, and her face did all the talking her carefully chosen words were trying not to do. And then, this is the detail that turned the whole thing into a viral event. Serena admitted on camera that chocolate isn't really her thing. She tried a piece anyway. She called them beautiful while visibly wrestling with the situation. Then came the candles. The candles that, in Meghan's own marketing copy, are said to be inspired by her children's birthdays. Serena tried to read the scent notes out loud. She couldn't get her mouth around the ingredients, multiple of them. She wrapped the video with, "Looks good. I love you, Meg." The clip went viral inside an hour. Piers Morgan's verdict was instant and merciless. When your closest, most famous ally on earth can't pronounce your product while she's actively trying to sell it for you, that isn't a bad PR day. That's the death of a brand. And the facts sitting behind that one viral moment only sharpen the picture. On Meghan's luxury clothing resale platform, according to reports published across a range of outlets, she had, at the point of the most recent disclosure, sold a single-digit number of items. Some buyers, according to reports circulating on consumer feedback platforms, received candles with no wicks inside. A wickless candle marketed as a candle is the kind of detail that lives in your inbox for months. The launch of the original jam range, the grand unveiling of the entire lifestyle empire, reportedly involved labels peeling off jars before they even reached the customers who paid for them. Step back from the individual product complaints for a second and take in the wider frame. This is a woman who, by widely reported figures, held a Netflix agreement valued in the region of $100 million in its original form, and a Spotify agreement in the region of $20 million before that arrangement ended. The most recognized name on earth for a solid 3-year window. And the commercial reality she has managed to build out of all of that is broken chocolate, wickless candles, peeling labels, and single-digit clothing sales. Nobody, in the cold arithmetic of the marketplace, is buying it. Literally. Truth 7. The Ukraine speech that crossed a line, there is no crossing back. This one is different in kind from the others. This one isn't about branding or contradictions or viral embarrassments. This one is about power. Who holds it? Who doesn't? And what happens when you reach for a title you abandoned to wade into geopolitics on the global stage? Harry went to Ukraine in a private capacity. No mandate from Britain, no official role, no authorization from the palace, from Downing Street, from anyone. He took his place beside heads of state and former prime ministers, and he delivered a speech calling for American leadership on the conflict, a speech that publicly contradicted the stated position of Donald Trump. Piers Morgan called the intervention infantile. He called it immature. He called it reckless. And the response from the White House confirmed the speech had landed exactly as badly as Piers had warned it would. Trump was asked about it in public and answered with characteristic bluntness that Prince Harry does not speak for the United Kingdom. But this is where it turns genuinely serious. Because at the very moment Harry was giving that speech in Ukraine, telling the world this was precisely what he was born to do, King Charles was preparing for one of the most consequential diplomatic engagements of his entire reign. The recent state visit to and from the United States, a moment of global weight that demanded precision, careful choreography, and total political neutrality. Harry's speech dropped only days before the king himself stood at his own podium on American soil. The palace, by every available signal, was incandescent. The British government, by every available signal, was incandescent. And when you piece together the context, a non-working royal who stripped himself of formal duties by his own choice, freelancing on geopolitics off the leverage of a title he abandoned, you start to grasp why the anger was not merely political. It was personal. Piers has put it about as plainly as anyone could. You cannot freelance off the back of a title you walked away from. You made the choice to leave. You made the choice to step back from the working role. You do not then get to summon that identity when it's useful for your global profile and shed it again the moment it involves actual duty. The palace read it exactly that way. And what followed was the clearest indication yet that the relationship between Harry and his family has crossed a line from which, by every available sign, there may be no route back. Truth 6. The public silence that spoke louder than any palace statement ever could. Watch this one carefully, because it's the kind of moment that flashes past in seconds, but carries the weight of a verdict. During the King's recent United States state visit, in front of the President of the United States and a watching global audience, the King spoke about American cities that bear the names of members of his family. He mentioned Charleston, named after King Charles II. He mentioned Williamsburg, named after King William. He did not mention Harry. On one of the biggest stages of his reign, in one of the most tightly scripted moments of his public diplomacy, listing the ways in which his family's history is stitched into the fabric of America, the king simply left his second son off the roster. Piers Morgan spotted it in real time. He called it deliberate. He called it public. He called it unmistakable. Not an oversight, not a scripting choice, a signal. A cold, calculated, precisely delivered signal broadcast on the most public platform in the world to an audience of hundreds of millions, one that cannot be walked back and cannot be smoothed over. Now hold that signal up against what has already befallen the former Duke of York, now formally known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. The king has publicly backed the formal stripping of his brother's titles, patronages, and official links, including his departure from his royal residence. Those institutional steps were carried out quietly. Those institutional steps were carried out completely. And figures close to the king are now telling royal commentators, Piers Morgan among them, that the question being asked inside the palace is whether Harry might face institutional steps of the same shape. The case Piers has been making in his commentary is that the king may be wrestling with what those around him have described as the nuclear option, doing to Harry what has already been done to Andrew, removing Styles, ending official ties, slamming the institutional door closed formally and finally. And here is the thread of Piers's argument that should genuinely alarm Harry's team. Andrew disgraced himself privately and through his association with a convicted criminal. He never went public against the institution. He never wrote a memoir dismantling the institution from the inside out. He never gave a global broadcaster 2 hours of detailed personal commentary on the people who raised him. He did not sign a deal with a streaming platform for a documentary series about the family. He did not spend 400 pages of his own book describing the royal household as cold, cruel, and unlivable. Harry has done every single one of those things. And if the king has proven willing to remove his own brother for what surrounded the Andrew situation, the logical question Piers asks, quite simply, is what would prevent the same institutional response when the conduct in question is public assault on the institution itself? The question, in Piers's framing, is no longer whether the option is theoretically on the table. The question is whether, given the weight of the conduct, it has become inevitable. That is a reported framing, not a confirmed plan. But it is now sitting on the table in public in a way it has never been before. Truth 5. The Friendship Playbook. Let's talk about the people who have been shown the door out of Meghan's life, not as gossip, but as a pattern. Because Piers Morgan has always argued that the most revealing thing about any public figure is not who they surround themselves with, it is who they have systematically discarded. And when you take the list of people who have been genuinely close to Meghan Markle, close in the real sense, not the PR-adjacent sense, and then track what has happened to those relationships across time, the shape of it becomes very difficult to look away from. Her entire family on her father's side, by widely reported accounts, gone. Her father himself, a man whose own behavior around staged paparazzi photographs was well covered at the time, but who by every available signal has been cut off completely since the wedding. Friends she once described in her early royal chapter as lifelong, advisors who worked closely alongside her during the palace years. Multiple members of staff who exited under circumstances serious enough to generate a formal bullying inquiry from the institution itself. Jason Knopf, the former communications secretary at Kensington Palace, put his concerns down on paper in 2018. A black and white email to his superior describing what he characterized as a pattern of conduct toward staff. He used specific language about staff members being bullied out of their positions and their confidence systematically undermined. That is not an anonymous whisper. That is a named senior employee with a documented paper trail. Piers Morgan has stated this cleanly and without softening. A woman who has removed almost everyone who ever pushed back on her, who has been publicly severed from her own family members one by one, and around whom a formal workplace investigation was opened at Kensington Palace, is not, in his framing, in any position to be launching content on the art of friendship and human connection. She recently rolled out material positioning her as an authority on friendship. Piers's response to that positioning was immediate and characteristically direct. Speaking as one of the many people he says he watched her cut off the moment her circumstances changed, he does not consider her qualified to be lecturing anyone else on how to be a good friend. The audience, by every available sign, is starting to agree. It's also worth pausing on the wider pattern of departures from the immediate Sussex operation since the original royal exit, because that pattern is a story of its own. A long roll call of senior communications professionals has cycled through the outfit. Catherine St. Laurent, the first chief of staff in the United States, was gone within roughly a year. Sarah Latham, brought in from a senior Democratic Party background, arrived and then departed. Several other credentialed press operatives, recruited to bring order to the brand, have followed similar arcs. The pattern, in Piers's framing and in serious royal reporting, is remarkably consistent. Professionals arrive expecting to impose discipline. The discipline collides with the operating culture. The professionals leave. The chair empties. The next candidate is hired. And the cycle rolls on. That is not the ordinary churn of the labor market. That is what the published reporting describes as a structural feature of how the operation is run. Truth 4. The visa dossier. This is the one Piers Morgan has, more than once, described as the quiet danger. The one that isn't generating the loudest headlines at the moment, but that carries, in his published commentary, the most genuinely serious long-term consequences of anything in this entire story. Here are the facts on the record. The Heritage Foundation, a long-established conservative policy institute based in Washington, filed a Freedom of Information Act request seeking access to Prince Harry's United States immigration records. The grounds for the request were straightforward. In his memoir Spare, published in 2023, Harry openly acknowledged past use of several controlled substances, including cocaine, cannabis, and psychedelic mushrooms. Past drug use is a question routinely asked on United States visa applications. Failing to disclose it on a visa application is not, in the cold language of the law, a technicality. It is grounds for adverse immigration consequences. The Heritage Foundation argued in court that the public had a legitimate interest in learning whether Harry properly disclosed that history and whether he had received any form of favorable treatment. In September of 2024, United States District Judge Carl Nichols ruled in favor of the Department of Homeland Security, finding that the Duke's privacy interest outweighed the public's interest in disclosure. That, at the time, looked like the end of the road. It was not. In March of 2025, the same judge reversed course. Judge Nichols ordered the Department of Homeland Security to publicly file redacted versions of the documents it had previously submitted to the court in private. The order required the documents to be released by the close of business on March 18, 2025. They were duly released. More than 80 pages of court filings and transcripts entered the public record. On the released versions, large sections had been blacked out. Reported independently in Reuters, in the Associated Press, on CNN, and across multiple British outlets. The documents released did not include Harry's actual visa application form. They contained court filings, government declarations, and supporting affidavits explaining why the agency believed full disclosure could expose the Duke to harm in the form of harassment and unwanted media attention. The government argued in published filings that there was no evidence Harry had received special treatment in his visa process. The Heritage Foundation, according to published reporting, was not satisfied with that finding, and the wider case remained by every available indication ongoing. And here is the line from open court that Piers Morgan has quoted repeatedly. The Heritage Foundation's attorney, arguing the case publicly, stated that if a visa applicant lied on their immigration form, that, in the attorney's own words, gets you deported. That is a real, on-the-record statement made by a named attorney in a federal courtroom. People are, in the routine practice of federal immigration enforcement, deported for material misrepresentations on visa applications. These are not theoretical consequences. They are applied regularly to applicants carrying a fraction of the public profile of the Duke of Sussex. It is also worth being honest about what the released documents do and do not establish, because the precision matters here. The released documents do not contain Harry's actual visa application. They contain court filings, government declarations explaining why disclosure was opposed, and supporting affidavits from federal officials. The published Department of Homeland Security position in those filings is that the agency found no evidence Harry received favorable treatment in his visa process. That is the government's published finding, and it deserves to be reported as such. What the released documents do not do is close the underlying question. The redactions are extensive. The Heritage Foundation, by every published sign, has continued to pursue the wider case, and the public still has no direct visibility into what Harry actually wrote on his visa application form about past drug use. That gap is exactly what keeps this case alive in published commentary. The wider political weather around all of this matters too. The Department of Homeland Security fought the disclosure for 2 solid years. The administration currently in office at the time of the most recent filings has, by every available signal in published commentary, no particular goodwill toward the Sussex household. Piers Morgan, in his published commentary across multiple platforms, has said the case is nowhere near finished. In his understated phrasing, he has noted that there may be trouble ahead. He is not overstating anything. This is an active federal court case with named parties, a named attorney, a named judge, and documented public admissions in Harry's own published words. The clock on this one is still running. According to available reporting, the next chapter of this story will be written in court filings, not in tabloids. Truth 3. The financial reckoning bearing down at speed. Piers Morgan has always argued that the money, in the end, would be the truth that mattered most. Not the titles, not the interviews, not the dramas, the money. This week, according to published reporting, that picture has come into sharper focus than at any point since the original royal departure. Financial commentators close to this story are now giving Harry and Meghan, by widely cited reporting, a runway of roughly 5 years before they would face what one source has described as a lifestyle adjustment they cannot brand their way out of. That is the reporting, not my forecast. The reporting cites the inheritance Harry received from Princess Diana in part as a younger man, as significantly drawn down. The inheritance he received from the Queen Mother on a later milestone birthday is, by these same accounts, also being drawn on to fund the current lifestyle. Now consider what they are actually living on. The headline Netflix agreement has, according to published reporting, ended in its original form. Spotify is finished. The as-ever lifestyle brand is, by every available metric, not performing at anywhere close to the level needed to sustain the current operation. The Invictus Games is a charitable institution, not a personal revenue line. The Archwell Foundation closed at the end of 2025, and here is the detail that has become a quiet punchline among people who live in and around Montecito, one of the wealthiest zip codes in America. When you buy a house in that community at the price reportedly paid, the next thing you do is renovate it. That is not showing off. It is simply what is done in that neighborhood. You bring the property up to the standard the community expects. Harry and Meghan, by widely cited reporting from sources Tom Sykes has now spoken to and published, moved into their property essentially as they found it. A house last properly updated during the previous renovation cycle, carried out by a former owner more than a decade earlier. In Montecito terms, that is a financial signal. The neighbors can read it. And the people living around them are now, according to Sykes's reporting, openly describing the Sussexes in language that captures exactly what kind of signal the unrenovated house is sending. 5 years of reserves before a lifestyle change becomes unavoidable. That is the estimate. Not one of the current revenue streams is performing at the level required to push that deadline further out. Piers Morgan has said for years that when the money begins to run out, the real story begins. The real story, by every available sign, is now being written. Truth 2. The bullying files and the institution that refused to let it slide. Let's not allow this one to get lost underneath the lifestyle brand noise, because it is arguably the most institutionally serious allegation ever attached to the name Meghan Markle, and it has never been publicly resolved. In 2021, Kensington Palace announced that it was opening a formal investigation into bullying allegations made against the Duchess of Sussex by multiple members of staff. This was not a tabloid confection. This was the palace itself, an institution that goes to almost supernatural lengths to avoid public conflict, publicly announcing that it had received enough credible material to warrant a formal inquiry. The timing of that announcement was striking. It came days before the broadcast of the Oprah Winfrey interview. The palace was clear that staff members had come forward, that documented communications existed, and that the matter would be examined. The findings of the investigation were never publicly released. The palace decided the findings would remain confidential. The Sussex camp, through public statements, characterized the announcement as a coordinated effort to damage Meghan's image ahead of the Oprah broadcast. That has been the published Sussex position ever since. But the underlying email trail did not, by any available sign, evaporate. Jason Nauf, the communications secretary at Kensington Palace at the relevant time, did commit his concerns to writing in 2018. His emails exist in the public record. His language, according to reports across multiple outlets, was specific, measured, and professional. He described a pattern of behavior that had, in his characterization, caused serious harm to people working in close proximity to the Duchess. 2 staff members were specifically described in the wider reporting as having been bullied out of their roles. That is named, documented, on-the-record reporting, not an unsourced rumor. Piers Morgan has returned to this point again and again for a simple reason. An institution built to protect the monarchy above almost everything else, decided in 2021 that the allegations were serious enough to announce publicly. That is the opposite of nothing. And when you place that formal inquiry alongside the trail of cut-off friends, severed family members, and departed advisors running from before the royal years, through them, and beyond them, you are not looking at a chain of unfortunate coincidences. You are looking at a consistent, documented record. One Piers Morgan has been citing, sourcing, and defending for half a decade. Truth 1. The claim that cost him the career. Number 1. The claim Piers Morgan made the morning after Meghan first sat down with Oprah Winfrey in March of 2021. The claim he stated so plainly, so directly, so completely without a hedge, that it cost him one of the biggest chairs in British breakfast television. The claim that, according to Ofcom figures, generated roughly 40,000 formal complaints to the regulator. The claim that, according to published reports at the time, the Duchess of Sussex herself personally complained about directly to the broadcaster. The claim Piers refused, even after losing his livelihood over it, to retract. He said, "I don't believe her." Not, "I disagree with her characterization." Not, "I think certain details need clarifying." He said, in the on-air phrasing he used, that he wouldn't believe her if she read him the weather. That line entered the popular vocabulary of British television almost overnight. Within 24 hours, he had walked off the set of Good Morning Britain. Within 2 days, he had left the program entirely. By the figures published at the time, the number of formal complaints lodged with Ofcom about that single broadcast came in around 40,000. One of the highest single complaint counts in the regulator's recent memory. The Duchess of Sussex, according to published reporting at the time, was understood to have lodged her own personal complaint directly with the broadcaster. That was 2021. Now look at this one single week. She has told the world she was the happiest she had ever been. Then she has pushed out content suggesting these have been the hardest 7 years of her life. She has, in earlier public remarks, told an audience of school children she was the most trolled person in the world across consecutive years. She has, through her circle, allowed content about reigning again to swirl around her image. And she has, across the Oprah interview, the Netflix series, and the 400 pages of Spare, laid out the public case that the family she married into was cold, cruel, and impossible. Ask yourself the question Piers has always asked. How many of those statements can be simultaneously true? Not whether they sound compelling, not whether they are delivered with emotion, whether they are actually true in the basic, everyday sense that one single life can hold all of them at the same time. The moment you lay them beside each other, they buckle against one another. Piers Morgan has always maintained that the core problem is not that Meghan lies in provable, obvious ways. The core problem, in his framing, is that she has never decided who she actually is. Victim or victor, duchess or celebrity, devoted private mother or global commercial brand. The happiest she has ever been or barely surviving the hardest years of her life. The institution's greatest modern asset or its most damaged casualty. She keeps trying, by his published analysis, to be all of those things at once, reaching for whichever identity happens to suit the moment she is standing in. And what this week has confirmed, beyond the broken chocolate, the viral unboxing, the Instagram reposts, the Ukraine speech, the financial reporting, and the federal court case, is that the audience has finally stopped being willing to follow her through the contradictions. Piers Morgan paid an enormous professional price for saying 5 years ago what the mainstream of public commentary is now openly saying for itself. He didn't wait for the consensus to gather. He staked out his position. He defended it under extraordinary pressure. He walked away from a job most people would have clung to at almost any cost, rather than surrender his right to say it. And he has, by every reasonable measure of what he originally claimed and what has happened since, been proven right on the central point. So here is where we land. 10 claims, 5 years in the building, all landing inside the same extraordinary week. A happiness statement and a hardest 7 years statement, 3 weeks apart. A queen aesthetic kept alive by an inner circle long after the formal departure. A Serena Williams unboxing that turned into a market verdict. A Ukraine speech delivered days before one of the most significant diplomatic engagements of the king's reign. a pointedly missing name at the moment when its absence carried maximum weight. A documented pattern of severed relationships running from before the royal years, through them, and beyond them. An active federal court case with named parties, a named judge, and real legal exposure that has not gone away. A reported financial deadline visible at 5 years and closing. A formal palace bullying inquiry that has never been publicly resolved. And a 5-year-old claim that ended a British breakfast television career, one the world has now, in slow motion, quietly caught up to. You cannot manufacture credibility by launching another product line. You cannot rebuild trust through a rocking chair interview with a friend. You cannot reclaim an institution after publicly attacking it, then sell its imagery on a candle, then expect the audience to applaud the coherence of the project. And you cannot, by every available signal from the celebrity friends who once stood beside you at the altar, hold on to the public endorsement of a circle that has very politely moved on. Not everything in this story is finished. The visa case is live. The title question inside the palace remains, by every available indication, unresolved. The financial runway is narrowing, but has not yet closed. There is still time for decisions, for corrections, for either Harry or Meghan to choose a meaningfully different road. But what cannot be undone is the credibility that has, across the last several years, drained out of the operation in front of a watching global audience. Piers Morgan was right. He said so. He paid for saying so. And the rest of the public commentary world is, by any honest reading, now catching up to him. The wider lesson beyond the 10 individual claims is the pattern itself. Not one of these vindications has arrived through tabloid speculation. Every one of them has landed through documented reporting, named sources, federal court filings, official palace announcements, or Meghan's own published words sitting next to her other published words and refusing to reconcile. That is the standard Piers set for himself 5 years ago. And that is the standard the wider commentary has now adopted in his wake. Stay sharp. Stay watching. Because the story that began at a royal wedding 7 years ago is not over. It is, by any honest reading, only just entering the chapter that everybody else has been able to see coming for a very, very long time. I'll see you very